All right, let's go to the next section here, part two of the tissues. When we look at the epithelial tissues and we have them described, what we do is we describe them by indicating what type of cell makes up the tissue. Since the tissue is very cellular, that's a good way of identifying it. And then we also identify, or we're looking at a tissue that is one layer thick or more than one layer. So cell type wise, we have a few main ones that I'd like to touch on today. Squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Let's look at them right here. We have the squamous cells up here. They're flat, they're fried egg looking cells. But then we have cuboidals, and the cuboidals look like cube-shaped cells. We have them right there. And then we have columnar, and columnars are column-shaped cells. They're tall, like a column. And what the first row here looks like, it's like a single layer of those cells, and then on the bottom we have at least the first two in here are multiple layers. So one that's many and one that's two. The single layer one looks, we term that simple, as in a simple squamous, for example, epithelial tissue, and multiple layers we can term that stratified. So when we go back here, we look at the different cell types. So the squamous cell looks like fried eggs when we look at them. And that's a very thin cell, and that's great for the fusion of gases. Like in the lungs, we have the alveoli, and those are very thin air sacs that let the oxygen diffuse through them. Then a second type was the cuboidal, and they're cube-shaped, and they are great for absorption, liquidy absorption in particular. They're also excellent for secretion, which we have in glands. And then the columnar type we looked at, they're very good for absorption also, but more like food stuff, where we have a little more abrasion. It's a little tougher environment. Those in the intestinal lining, where we absorb the food items, those areas are filled with lubricating mucus cells. So you will see those when you look at slides of those cell types. And those cells are called goblet cells. And then when we look at the layers, we have a simple layer on the stratified layer. So the one layer is simple, and that is great for diffusion and absorption and secretion. And then a stratified layer is the multiple layer, and that's excellent for protection because, like in the skin, for example, we can bump into things and cells on the outer layers will fluff off, and make for a great carpet. But we have many more underneath coming up, and since epithelial tissue is very regenerative, we continuously make new cells, and so we continuously supply those outer layers to be falling off. So that's where protection comes in. In the mouth, we also have the same thing. It's just the skin is dried cells, and in the mouth, it's not dried, they're moist. And then we also have surface differentiations. We look at things on top of the surface of these epithelial cells. Since they're attached to a basement membrane, they also then have a top surface, and we call that the apical surface. And we have mainly two extension types. We have villi and microvilli. I indicate here microvilli. What they do is they increase the surface area, and that is great for absorption. So if you look here, you have these are the microvilli here that I'm looking at. And so look at how much more surface area I'm going to create when I have these things going up and down as compared to just having a flat surface that goes across. And so that's why that is useful. In the intestine, we call that the brush border. And so when we get to that end of the chapters, we have also then brush border enzymes. And those are enzymes that are within those areas, and that they help break down the food items into the smaller and smaller particles, so we can then absorb them. The second extension that I'm looking at is the cilia. And I like to see that here on the top right, because what the cilia are, they are extensions that come out of the cell and act like a whip. So they propel food substances across their cell surface with that. So they move themselves and they whip stuff. Like, for example, in your lungs, the mucus. In the trachea will move out, and you get this nice cough and mucus coming up with all kind of dust and all kind of stuff in it. And so that's the cleaning apparatus for the lungs and the airways. And then we have a third type of extension, and that's the flagellum. And the flagellum is not really anywhere other than in a sperm. I mean, this is actually not a sperm, but this is another type of cell, not in our human body, that has flagella. But what that flagellum does, it moves the cell forward, so it propels the cell forward. And in our body, we have that be the sperm. Then we look at cell junctions. Since this tissue is very cellular, we need to attach the cells to one another somehow, and we have different things that we can that do that. And these different types of junctions have different qualities arising from them. So we have desmosomes, and those anchor cells to one another. And then we have tight junctions, and those cells make the cells watertight. So there's no water going in between, or no liquid going in between the cells. That's excellent for skin. Both of those are excellent for skin, because you don't want to pull on your skin and the cells just fall apart, and your skin rips apart. And you also don't want water to penetrate into your inside of your body. That would not be a good thing. So let's see them here. The artist's view of this is tight junctions, are like here. And then desmosomes, they're the adhesive anchoring ones, and they're like here, they go around. So do the tight junctions, obviously. So tight junctions make them watertight, and desmosomes anchor the cells together. And then we have, we have gap junctions. And the gap junctions are indicated here. These are basically holes going between the cells. And we don't usually see them or study them in this tissue type. We actually study them in the heart muscle tissue type. Because there we want to have ions go between the cells. And ions are charged molecules, and the charged molecule can carry an electrical charge. And so that's a nerve impulse. And so in the heart, we need to send a nerve impulse throughout the whole heart as a sort of like a fast-acting thing, so the heart contracts as a whole. So we'll talk about that later, but those are very interesting too. So we have three junction types. You have desmosomes, tight junctions, and gap junctions. And that brings us to the end of the epithelial tissue, is the glandular epithelium. That's very, very distinctly specialized. We have glandular cells within other tissues, like we talked briefly about the goblet cells in the intestine making the mucus. We also have those in the trachea, by the way. And then we have cells that come together and make distinct glands, like the sweat glands underneath your skin, or also endocrine glands, like the pancreas. And so when we talk about then those glands, those distinctly made structures, we have exocrine glands, and those produce substances that are carried to the outside world via ducts. So those need ducts within them. When we see at the skin later on, we'll see, well, actually, hold on real quick. You can see those here. You see his as a skin hair right here. And then this is a sebaceous gland. That's an oily type gland, and that secretes their oily substances. I call it my skin lotion gland. That oily substance is secreted into the hair follicle right there. So those are exocrine glands, the one type of glandular tissue. And then endocrine glands secrete their secretions directly into the bloodstream. Those are the ones we're going to study in the endocrine chapter. Okay? And then lastly, we have sensory cells, and there's a very specific type receptor cells that are derived from the epithelial tissue. And we study those later when we get to the nervous tissue. So what sensory receptors do is they transform a light or pressure or chemical type stimuli or temperature and make it into an electrical signal. So that's very interesting when we study that. All right, let's go to the next chapter.